Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for this 90-minute webinar entitled The Pyramid Model, Supporting Social Emotional Development of Infants and Toddlers Through Family Coaching. This training integrates expert knowledge and content from Dr. Aaron Barton of Vanderbilt University, along with professionals working within the Center for Leadership and Disability at Georgia State University. Prior to beginning the webinar, please be sure to complete the online training pretest using the link provided by your Early Intervention Coordinator. You will complete this online assessment before you view the webinar and again after viewing the webinar. Before we begin, please have a printed copy of your activity packet and a writing utensil available. Please take a moment to fill in your personal information at the bottom portion of the cover page of your activity packet now. You will be asked to complete a total of 10 activity items throughout the webinar, and will then return your completed activity packet to your District Early Intervention Coordinator. Please note that due to the pre-recorded nature of this webinar, you may pause and resume the training at any given time. We would like to begin first by having you define your own ideas and beliefs around child's social emotional development. In item number 1 of your activity packet, please write your definition of social emotional development. We will take 1 minute to complete this task. Again, you may pause the webinar if more time is needed to complete any task. Thank you for completing item number 1. Next, we would like to know what comes to your mind when you envision a high-quality early childhood professional. In item number 2 of your activity packet, please respond to the following questions. First, what characteristics do you think high-quality early intervention professionals should have? Second, what skills or knowledge would a high-quality early intervention professional have? We will take 1 minute to complete this task. Again, please note you may pause the webinar if ever you need more time to write your responses. Thank you for completing item number 2 in your activity packet. As many of you recall from parents interacting with infants or Pee-wee training, Research supports an approach to early intervention that fosters family confidence, competence, and mutual enjoyment. This goal is best achieved through a coaching model to early intervention, where interventionists involve family members and act as supporters and helping caregivers build new skills to promote child development. Strong, competent families who are able to be deeply involved with their children are the greatest contributors to child progress and well-being. Today we will be discussing the pyramid model for promoting social emotional competence in infants and toddlers. The pyramid model is a framework that describes essential and increasing levels of support for young children and their families. We will first explore Tier 1, universal promotion for all infants and toddlers, as well as their caregivers. As you see here, Tier 1 supports center around helping families to establish both nurturing and responsive relationships with young children, as well as high-quality environments to promote child development. Both components depend on strong partnerships with families. With these in place, most families will not need more intensive interventions. We will discuss Tier 1 in more depth later on in today's webinar. After that, we will explore Tier 2, also known as the secondary tier of prevention. Here we address the needs of infants and toddlers at risk for social emotional challenges, including the necessary support for their caregivers. And last, we will explore Tier 3, also known as the tertiary or intensive level of intervention for children with severe and persistent challenging behavior, including supports for caregivers. Supports at Tier 3 involve in-depth assessment of child behavior and implementation of individualized behavior support plans. We will cover Tier 3 during the final portion of today's webinar. Additionally, Babies Can't Wait is currently collaborating with Georgia State University to provide an upcoming live training solely focused on Tier 3 approaches for Babies Can't Wait staff in the spring of 2018. We will now discuss universal social emotional supports for all infants and toddlers at Tier 1 of the pyramid. Tier 1 is rooted in research that supports the relationship between child's social competence and both nurturing and responsive relationships, as well as high-quality supportive environments. Along these lines, research shows that child social emotional functioning is best supported by parents who are physically and emotionally sensitive to the child. Research also shows that children thrive in high-quality, supportive environments where families make a variety of learning materials and toys available, also providing encouragement to the child to try new challenges with learning materials. Successful implementation of the pyramid model will depend on the strong collaboration among family and intervention team members. As you will notice throughout today's webinar, partnerships with families are essential at every tier of support within this pyramid. As many of you already know, a direct service model where an interventionist works directly with a child tends to result in a number of negative outcomes. The family may become dependent on a professional. Learning opportunities for a child are limited to time spent with an interventionist, and caregiver feelings of confidence and competence may drop. For these reasons, and for many more, it is critical that we are partnering with all families to support nurturing, responsive relationships and high-quality environments for young children. This caregiver home visitor partnership was described in depth during Pee-wee training, where the primary goals in partnering with families included building both child and caregiver confidence, competence, and mutual enjoyment. In highlighting the influence of caregiver-child relationships on child's social-emotional development, we will now discuss the transactional framework between child and environment. The transactional model framework tells us that an infant's unique characteristics influence the parenting relationship. For example, research tells us that parents respond more to infants who use complex gestures and words than those who simply point. Parents also respond less frequently to fussy, crying babies. Additionally, the frequency of an infant's gesture, smile, eye contact, and babbling affects how adults respond. Conversely, early childhood social emotional development is the product of caregiver-infant relationships and the environment within which these relationships unfold. It's up to the caregiver to change what they do to support their infant and toddler. Likewise, it's up to the family coach or home visitor to change what they do to support the parents and family in creating nurturing and responsive environments that promote child engagement, initiations, nonverbal communication, and attempts at verbal communication. The term social-emotional development refers to the developing capacity of young children to trust by forming close and secure adult and peer relationships, to become more self-aware by experiencing, regulating, and expressing emotions in socially and culturally appropriate ways, and to become more autonomous and independent, exploring the environment and learning, all within the context of family, community, and culture. Social emotional competence is just another term for child mental health. The two concepts can be used interchangeably. In technical terms, child social emotional competence is rooted in the presence of satisfying interactions between the child, caregivers, siblings, and peers, comfortable self-images and perceptions by others, and child matching and modulation of emotional and social responses to the environment. Take a moment to ask yourself, what does social emotional competence look like? What types of behaviors do you see in babies who you consider to have a positive social emotional outlook? Perhaps you envision a baby who smiles, makes eye contact, and maintains a relatively routine sleep schedule. What types of behaviors do you see in babies with whom you may have concerns about social emotional development? Perhaps you envision a baby who is difficult to soothe or who shows little to no interest in his or her surroundings. Let's take a moment to stop and reflect. Please write your responses to the following question in item 3 of your activity packet. How does knowing social emotional milestones help you build supportive relationships and promote social emotional development of young children? Thank you for completing item number 3 within your activity packet. When working with families, it is important that all parties are clear about their roles in supporting child's social and emotional development. The family plays a number of important roles within the team. Caregivers are the experts of their children and provide all other team members with critical information related to child's strengths, child preferences, and struggles. Family members are the receivers of information and should be involved with implementing strategies with guidance, support, or coaching from the intervention team as needed. Interventionists are responsible for gathering information, assessing the social emotional status of the child and the family, providing developmental information, and coaching the family to use effective strategies as needed in natural environments and routines. The starting point for prevention and early intervention for social emotional delays begins with universal screening. Initial screening at the Tier 1 level of support helps us identify children who need more formal social emotional assessments and who may need more intensive support at tiers 2 or 3 of the pyramid. These two types of data-based decision-making within Tier 1 are universal screening of the environment as well as screening of the child's social emotional milestones. Environmental factors that often impact child's social emotional development include, but are not limited to, poverty, caregiver workload, lack of family social support, domestic violence, and substance abuse. The Environmental Screening Questionnaire, or ESQ, is one form of formal assessment for environmental screening. However, in the spirit of partnering with families, environmental information may also be gathered through observation and informal conversations with the family. Formal screening of child social-emotional development may be conducted through tools like the Ages and Stages Questionnaire, or ASQ-SE. The purpose of this screening is to identify children who need further, more in-depth testing of social-emotional milestones. It is important to note that screening tools do not diagnose. The Centers for Disease Control have made the following resource available to the public in a number of languages. The Milestones Moment booklet is a user-friendly screening tool outlining developmental milestones in a variety of domains for children aged 2 months to 5 years. Each age range lists early warning signs for use in early screening and indicate the need for more in-depth developmental assessment. The book also provides tips and strategies that parents can use to promote child development. Here we see examples of milestones within each area of social emotional development across age ranges of early childhood. You may find more detailed information describing this developmental continuum within handout 1.4. This format of screening allows us to check for child indicators related to each social emotional domain. For example, on this page, with ages ranging from birth to 15 months, child attachment, trust, and security may be gauged through indicators like the child stretching out arms to be taken or using a preferred item for security. Also, child self-awareness and identity development may be gauged through indicators like the child talking to his or herself when alone or responding to his or her name. Child exploration, autonomy, and independence may be gauged through indicators like the child tracking a primary caregiver's voice or child expression of strong feelings like anger, anxiety, or affection. Here we see criteria for ages 2.5 to 3.5. Social emotional development grows based on abilities and learning over time. It is a process just like learning to talk, walk, and develop other skills. Social emotional competency is a prerequisite to the development of more advanced social skills and for the continued growth of emotional self-regulation. Notice here in our table that social emotional indicators change as the child ages chronologically. Many young children at risk for disabilities or with identified disabilities demonstrate delays in social emotional competencies. Also, deficits in physical, cognitive, or communicative abilities often interfere with social emotional development. Screening helps link families to appropriate services and supports, such as community-based prevention strategies and appropriate interventions to support the child-family relationship. Screening is imperative because we have an opportunity to help families intervene at key points of child development to support progress and growth. For an in-depth review of social emotional screening tools for young children, please see handout 1.18. Next, we are going to discuss Tier 2, or the secondary level of prevention, which targets social emotional supports for families with children determined to be at risk for delays and/or social emotional struggles. Strategies within this tier specifically aim to assist families with children who might need more intentional practices to promote child development or to prevent delays from becoming exacerbated. Some children need individualized instruction to help them self-regulate, learn to independently participate in their environments, express emotions, and develop relationships. It is our role as coaches to equip families with strategies to promote these skills. We often identify children and families who need Tier 2 supports through social emotional screenings and follow-up assessment. Social emotional assessments are used to identify the child's social emotional strengths and needs to identify goals and develop subsequent intervention plans. The social emotional assessment / evaluation measure, also known as the SEAM, is a formal social emotional assessment tool for children aged birth to 5, with both parent and professional versions available. There is also an adult version to assess caregiver benchmarks. Informal social emotional assessment in the form of conversations with family and behavioral observations is always occurring at Tier 2, especially for the purposes of identifying and targeting relevant goals. Information gathered through a combination of both formal and informal assessment assists practitioners in prevention and early identification of social emotional difficulties and behavior disorders, developmental functional, meaningful, measurable social emotional goals and interventions, and optimizing positive caregiver-child interactions. When selecting goals, we want to ensure that we are targeting skills that are functional, measurable, generalizable, and contextually relevant. Functionality of goals refers to skills that the child needs in order to interact with others or to participate in daily routines more independently. Generality refers to skills that the child could use across settings, materials, and people. Essentially, we want to know, will this skill be useful to the child across multiple contexts? Skills must also be measurable. This is essential so that parents and practitioners will be able to measure the skill over time to monitor child progress and determine if the intervention plan is working. When determining measurability, questions to ask may include, can the skill be seen or heard? Can multiple people agree that the same skill has occurred or has not occurred? Last but not least, we must consider instructional context when writing goals. The instructional context is the child's daily routines and activities. Thus, you must consider if learning opportunities for teaching the skill can be embedded into the child's daily routines and activities within natural settings. Work on skills within a tabletop context is not going to be appropriate for children who are aged birth to 5. Once we have decided what skills to teach in collaboration with the family, we must then set up a plan for when and how we will teach the new skill. Activity-based intervention focuses on multiple and varied learning opportunities across the day, across materials, and across people. It also focuses on providing timely and integral feedback directly related to the child's behavior as he or she is progressing towards or meeting goals. Prompt feedback is also essential as children demonstrate skills more and more independently. In the next several slides, we will discuss evidence-based approaches to teaching, all centered around a coaching approach that equips caregivers with tools to use child-focused strategies with their children to promote social and emotional development. Coaching is defined as a voluntary, non-judgmental, and collaborative partnership between an early childhood practitioner and the most important people in a child's life. All families can provide rich learning opportunities for their children. In using a coaching approach, we recognize families' strengths and resourcefulness. Research shows that when a parent feels secure in his or her relationship with early intervention staff, he or she feels more invested in the intervention. We must change what we do if the family is not changing their practices. We do our best to coach in a way that increases family responsiveness. To reiterate, coaching caregivers is essential for supporting parent-child interactions, focusing on skill development in the natural environment, and ensuring that parents feel confident and competent in encouraging their child's social and emotional development. In taking a coaching approach, we believe it is the family and the caregivers who influence the child, while we influence the family. We believe that children learn best throughout the day, not in separate goal times. Therefore, all the intervention really should occur between visits, highlighting the need for us as interventionists to support families, not focus on maximizing services. This figure shows that children receive about 1 hour of intervention or learning opportunities per week when the interventionist works directly with the child. The second figure on the bottom shows that when the interventionist works directly with the family rather than with the child, the child gets 84 hours of intervention or learning opportunities per week delivered by the family. Thus, focusing on the family really does maximize intervention for the child. This is using a family-centered approach to early intervention. Evidence-based coaching strategies have emerged in recent years. We will discuss some of these strategies now. First, by using adult learning strategies, it is best to make sure you keep parents motivated by focusing on their priorities. Principles of adult learning also center around opportunities for parents to hear, see, do, and reflect on the practices that they're learning. In using a coaching approach, we avoid working directly with the child, letting the parent practice and providing him or her feedback. Even our efforts at modeling procedures for parents should be immediately followed up with parent practice. As needed, coaches can use modeling to demonstrate specific practices either through videos or live models. As coaches, we support parents in trying out new skills, giving them several opportunities for practice. We reflect the skills they practice during session and also try to schedule our visits during routines to support parent practice during the visit within natural contexts. We may build motivation and support between visit-parent practice by talking to parents about routines and activities when they will use the strategies between visits. When necessary and feasible, we may also follow up with parents between visits. And last, we give parents performance-based feedback throughout the visit. It is critical that we are using empathy, pointing out positive child and parent use of skills, and reflecting on the whys behind child and parent behavior. To reiterate, the practitioner's role is to support the family's capacity to provide intervention and enhance the child's social emotional competence. Again, this is done by supporting the family within their daily routines and activities. Here we will summarize the 4 primary elements of activity-based intervention. We already discussed the importance in creating functional and generative goals. We do this by embedding learning into child-directed, routine, and planned activities across the day. We focus on multiple and varied learning opportunities, ensuring that intervention is maximized and the child has multiple learning opportunities. And lastly, activity-based intervention focuses on caregivers providing timely and integral feedback to the child to ensure that he or she is meeting goals. Feedback should be directly related to the child's positive behavior and use of the skills being taught. We will now take a moment to discuss embedding learning into routine, pre-planned, and child-directed activities across the day. Routines are generally the activities that happen in the same order each day for the family. These routines or sequences are unique to the culture and the lifestyle of the family. Planned activities include events like going to the park, the zoo, a trip to an extended family member's house, or any other activity that does not typically occur on a regular basis. Child-directed activities are spontaneous interactions initiated by the child and can occur any time of the day, including during daily routines. Child-directed activities are great for capturing the interests and motivation of the child in order to support learning. Intervention opportunities can be planned during all 3 types of activities that we just reviewed. Now that we have discussed the whens and wheres of intervention, it's time to move on to the hows of intervention. The first strategy we will discuss is environmental arrangement, which involves arranging the context to promote child initiations. You all may choose to review handout 2.7 for specific examples of each of the following environmental arrangement practices. One example of good environmental arrangement involves providing choices by planning ahead to have options for children. The goal is for the child to point or say what they want. It is also a good practice to coach parents on how to keep preferred child items in view but out of reach. This strategy can be used during snack, bath time, and playtime, for example. By placing the child's favorite book on a high shelf or putting the bath toys in the sink, the goal will be for the child to initiate to the adult and indicate that he or she wants something. Silliness, such as putting the child's hat on a dog or putting a train on the track upside down, can be incorporated into several routines. Help caregivers plan ahead to make sure materials are ready and the caregiver has the child's attention. The goal is for the child to protest or indicate that something is wrong to the adult. Encourage family members to use the child's preferred materials throughout routines to encourage engagement and interest. It is a good idea to rotate toys every once in a while to keep things interesting and novel. By providing inadequate portions of preferred items or activities piece by piece, parents can plan ahead and give the child just a very small amount of a preferred item or a brief amount of exposure to a preferred activity. The goal will then be for the child to tell the adult that they want more. Additionally, it's great to help parents plan ahead to give the child something that they need help to activate or open. The goal is for the child to ask the adult for help. Coach the caregiver through letting the child attempt to activate or open the item themselves. And make sure the caregiver has a good sense of when to intervene before the child gets frustrated. If the child looks like he or she is getting frustrated, bring these cues to the parent's attention and work with families to immediately prompt the child to say help in these situations. On the next slide, you will watch a video of a child-caregiver interaction. As you watch the video, please be thinking about what you observe. What do you notice about the behavior of the child? What effect does the environment or the parent's behavior have on the child's behavior or on the parent-child interaction? Also, if you are the home visitor working with this family, how would you craft a child outcome or goal to support this routine?
You don't trust him, do you? Open it. No, you do it. No, you do it. No, that's the shapes for mommy. Do it. Say please. Say please. Say please. You know how to say please. Say please. Hey. Hey. Say please. I don't like this. I don't like this at all.
The second strategy we will discuss is responsive teaching, which involves the coaching family members to be engaged and responsive to child cues, both verbal and nonverbal. You all may choose to review handout 2.8 for specific examples of each of these specific practices. The first strategy of responsive teaching involves coaching parents to follow the child's interests. Parents can do this by joining in their child's activities and imitating their actions. Second, coaches may model ways that parents can answer the child while avoiding unnecessary questions. Encourage parents to talk about what the child is doing rather than asking a lot of test questions like, "What color is it?" or "What does the pig say?" It is best to limit questions to yes or no questions and to stick to real questions aimed at functional child communication, like "What do you want?" or "Do you have to go to the bathroom?" It is sometimes necessary to coach families to talk just above the child's current level of communication. This ensures that the child understands what is being said and gives the child models to repeat. Another responsive teaching strategy involves showing parents how to match turns with their child. This is done by stopping after saying or doing something and giving the child a turn. This can also be done by matching the child's attempts to communicate, repeating and expanding upon what the child says with just one or two words. For example, if the child says truck, you might model saying blue truck or fast truck for the parent. In addition to matching and following the child's actions, encourage parents to talk about the actions also. Coach the parent to imitate the child's play or other behaviors to get his or her attention while talking about what the parent and the child are doing. Now let's move on to another strategy for implementation, incidental teaching. Incidental teaching is a strategy that works particularly well in combination with the environmental arrangement strategies. The following steps may be used to teach a child new skills during natural routines and environments. First, help parents arrange the environment to promote child initiations. For example, give the child choices. Put a favorite truck on a high shelf in the child's view, or give the child a very small amount of snack. Next, wait for the child to ask. If he or she asks, have the parent give them the item immediately. However, if the child does not ask, you may then encourage the parent to provide prompts by saying, "I want more," or "I want truck." If the child imitates the parent's model, the parent should give them the item. For some children, prompts for vocal communication will just not be setting up the child for success at this point in their development. At times, the intervention team may decide that prompts to use sign language or to use picture exchange cards will work as sufficient requests for preferred items. If the child does not imitate modeled prompts, the parent should be encouraged to provide just one more prompt by saying, "I want more," or modeling a sign. Then we need to coach the parents to immediately give the child the item after the second prompt. We do not want the child to get frustrated. The natural reinforcement is accessing the item or activity that the child was requesting. Caregivers should use this along with praise, but encourage parents to avoid providing too many words, which might interrupt the interaction and confuse the child. Next, we are going to view another video showing a mother just beginning to learn how to use incidental teaching to promote the child's skill development. As you watch the video, please complete item number 4 in your activity packet by listing 2 strategies the parent uses in the video. Also, please describe how you might coach the family to use additional strategies in the future.
Puzzles. What are you doing? Say help me. Help me. It's orange. Look at the picture. What does it look like? No. Orange. Good job.
Thank you for taking the time to complete your responses for item number 4 in your activity packet. Up until now, we have discussed screening, assessment, goal setting, and activity-based approaches to intervention, all in alignment with a coaching framework rooted in ongoing partnerships with families. We will now discuss a critical step at Tier 2, evaluation, also known as progress monitoring. The pyramid approach is a data-based decision-making model and uses data at each tier. Tier 1 uses data in a preventative way through universal screening. Tier 2 uses data during the assessment, intervention, and progress monitoring phases of early intervention. The purpose of progress monitoring at Tier 2 is to measure both caregiver implementation of teaching strategies and child mastery of social-emotional goals. The family coach defines and monitors each of these behavioral outcomes. The information derived from screening and assessment processes should be directly informing the intervention, and therefore the flow of data should be linked and seamless. Now that we've discussed tiers 1 and 2, we will focus on the top of the pyramid, intensive intervention at Tier 3, also known as tertiary supports. Tier 3 is designed to help children who display persistent, challenging behavior, as well as support for their families. When supporting families whose children have severe and persistent challenging behavior, we want to ensure that all levels of the pyramid model are in place for the child as we assist the family in developing and implementing effective, individualized behavior support plans. The levels of the pyramid model are additive, meaning that children who need tertiary supports also must have the bottom levels of the pyramid in place. Intensive individualized interventions are used with children who have very persistent and severe challenging behavior and do not respond to the typical preventative practices, child guidance procedures, or social emotional teaching strategies that would normally work with most children. Of the young children who show early signs of problem behavior, it has been estimated that fewer than 10% receive services for these difficulties. Teachers report that challenging behavior affects their overall job satisfaction. This is often reported to be the case with early intervention professionals as well. When we say challenging behavior, we are referring to any repeated pattern of behavior that interferes with learning or engagement in pro-social interactions with peers and adults, as well as behaviors that are not responsive to the use of developmentally appropriate guidance procedures. In the home and in the community, families may face challenging child behavior in the form of prolonged tantrums, physical and verbal aggression, disruptive vocal behavior such as screaming, property destruction, or self-injury. There may be a number of factors underlying the occurrence of challenging behavior. Physiologically, a developmental surge, medical concern, or biological predisposition may cause challenging behaviors to manifest. Barriers to a safe, predictable, nurturing, and responsive social-emotional environment can also precipitate challenging child behaviors. In many instances, when children do not have the language skills necessary to communicate appropriately, they may resort to using challenging behavior as a means of communication. A child who has limited social skills or who has learned that challenging behavior results in needs being met may also use challenging behavior instead of language. It is common to identify a combination of more than one of these factors as contributors to challenging child behavior. Here we see a list of some common challenging child behaviors. These become appropriate for intervention at Tier 3 when their occurrence is persistent, possibly worsening, and/or is interfering with the social emotional functioning of the child or the family. Remember, social emotional wellness is defined in terms of a child's ability to experience, regulate, and express emotions, to form close and secure relationships, and to explore and learn from the environment. Take note of withdrawal defined in terms listed here. A child displaying significant detachment or social withdrawal may require the more intensive individualized supports provided at Tier 3. When caregivers and interventionists are assessing the impact of challenging child behavior prior to intervention, it is necessary to evaluate behavioral impact through conversations with parents as well as observations of the child. First, the team needs to define the intensity of the behavior. Behaviors that are high in intensity may be defined in terms of the risk the behavior poses to harm the child or others. Behaviors with a moderate level of intensity interfere with child and family functioning, but may not pose a risk of physical harm. Behaviors of low intensity interfere minimally with child and family functioning. It is also important to consider the frequency with which a behavior occurs. Frequency of behavior is defined in terms of how often the behavior occurs. Behaviors that occur at a high frequency tend to pose significant challenges to family and child functioning. Duration of behavior is defined in terms of how long a behavior lasts. While some behaviors are discrete and only last momentarily, others may draw out for extended periods of time. Through emerging research, we have found that individualized positive behavior support, or IPBS, is a very powerful intervention approach. IPBS has been proven to be quite effective with all ages, diverse groups, and people of various cultures and disabilities. It is the only comprehensive approach that is evidence-based and addresses challenging behavior within a variety of natural settings. IPBS is an approach for changing child behavior, including research and principles from applied behavior analysis, a systematic approach to behavior modification. IPBS is unique, though, in its approach for developing an understanding of why the child engages in the challenging behavior, focusing on preventative strategies, and teaching the child new skills to replace challenging behavior. Research shows that as functionally equivalent replacement skills are taught and reinforced, challenging behaviors are decreased. We will discuss functionally equivalent replacement skills more later on in today's webinar. Positive behavior support is based on humanistic values and extensive multidisciplinary research. When adhering to IPBS, we take a holistic approach that considers all of the factors that impact a child, family, and the child's behavior. Conclusions and decisions made throughout the individualized positive behavior support process are data-driven. Goals and objectives are established within the context of family values and concerns related to the behavior. It is important to note that IPBS refrains from punitive measures of behavior change and instead emphasizes the importance of prevention and skill building through reinforcement-based strategies. We will now take a look at an overview of the steps taken during the IPBS process. We first begin by establishing a collaborative team and identifying the goals for addressing challenging behavior. When we refer to a team, there are at least 2 people involved: the family member, parent, or caregiver, and you. However, in addition, the team might include all of the child's therapists, interventionists, and additional family members. It is highly valued to involve everyone who might be interested and interact with the child. The more the entire team can be on the same page with intervention, the more easily the behavior can be resolved. The second step is to gather information that helps us understand the function or reason for the behavior. The team works collaboratively to gather pertinent information about when and where the challenging behavior is most likely to occur. It is also helpful to know when the behavior is least likely to occur. We want to identify common triggers leading up to the behavior. This process is also known as functional assessment. Functional assessment is a process that results in a portfolio of information. This assessment is not a formal test, but a set of observations and questions that you will use to dig deeper into the meaning of a child's challenging behavior. The family coach can describe the functional assessment process to families as a way of doing the detective work to understand the behavior better. The goal of working together is to develop a plan that will work for the family and that can be used in all environments feasibly. We will discuss specific methods for determining function of behavior later in today's webinar. Once the family coach has conducted an interview and completed observations of the targeted behaviors, a hypothesis is devised in partnership with the family, and it includes a concrete summary of why the behavior is occurring. It is important that the hypothesis is written down with the family and uses the family's words. The goal of this discussion is to get an agreement about the triggers, behaviors, and responses from others that perpetuate the behavior. Please note, many of you will participate in an upcoming Tier 3 training in spring of 2018, where you will all practice writing hypothesis statements in more depth. Once the child support team has determined the hypothesis, or best guess as to the function of the child's challenging behavior, the team can then begin working on the development of a behavior support plan, specifically linked to the results of the functional assessment. Once we know when and where the behavior is occurring most often, we can work with the family to modify those situations and routines to set the child up for success. Also, once we know specifically what the child is attempting to communicate through his or her behavior, we can select and reinforce more appropriate forms of communication to replace challenging child behavior. During IPBS, we talk with families about the importance in developing a plan with all of these components: prevention, replacement skills, and reinforcement. In just a moment, we will discuss prevention strategies in more detail. Later in the session, we will also learn about teaching replacement skills. The final step in the PBS process is to support the caregiver in implementing the plan and evaluating outcomes. We do this through coaching, feedback, and emotional support to caregivers as they begin to implement the plan. The implementation of a behavior support plan can be much more difficult than learning how to teach a child a new skill. Often, the behavior plan involves responding to challenging behavior, an emotionally charged event, in a new way. And that might be challenging for caregivers. They will need encouragement and emotional support in order to consistently and accurately implement the plan. During evaluation of child and caregiver progress throughout the intervention, it is very important that we are not only tracking the reduction of challenging behavior in systematic ways, but that we are also tracking improvements in targeted replacement skills and other behaviors that we are seeking to increase. Now that you are familiar with the IPBS process, let's explore some important behavioral principles. All of us communicate in some form. Even before children communicate verbally, their actions and behaviors communicate information to caregivers. As children develop, this communication becomes more and more deliberate. Positive behavior support is rooted in the belief that all behavior carries meaning and communicates a message. Remember, in many instances, when children do not have the language skills necessary to communicate appropriately, they will resort to using challenging behavior as a means of communication. A child who has limited social skills or has learned that challenging behavior will result in his or her needs being met may also use challenging behavior in place of language. Children engage in challenging behavior because it works for them, meaning the behavior helps them gain access to something or someone or avoid something or someone. Please turn to item number 5 within your process packets. Take a look at the picture of the baby shown here and in your packet. Please take a moment to list 2 or more messages this baby may be trying to communicate through her behavior. We will take approximately 30 seconds for you to write down your responses. Thank you for completing process activity item number 6 within your packet. As we mentioned earlier, children engage in challenging behavior because it works for them. Challenging behavior tends to result in the child either gaining access to something, such as preferred items, preferred activities, or attention from others, or the behavior tends to result in the child successfully avoiding something, such as non-preferred activities or routines, unwanted people, unwanted places, or situations. All of this contextual information helps us to better understand the function of the behavior or the reason why it is occurring. In positive behavior support, we seek to understand function before we can develop intervention strategies. Our intervention approach should match what we learned about the behavior and when it is being used. Every communicative behavior can be described by the form and the function of the communication. The form of the behavior is how a message is expressed, or how the behavior looks, where the function refers to the communicative intent of the message. What sort of request is being made through this behavior? To break this down further, we will now introduce the 4 primary functions of behavior: escape, attention, tangible, and sensory. An easy acronym to remember these 4 functions is that everyone eats. E for escape, A for attention, T for tangible, and S for sensory. Let's discuss each of these 4 functions a little bit more. Behaviors that are escape maintained occur in an attempt to have undesired activities or interactions removed. These behaviors tend to occur when a task is too hard, boring, or scary. For example, if Joe screams every time that it's time to put socks on, and screaming usually tends to result in Mom giving up on the socks, Joe's screaming serves an escape function. Behaviors that are attention maintained occur in an attempt to gain access to people or interactions. These behaviors tend to occur when a child is not receiving attention and wants social interaction. For example, if Marco throws toys every time Dad leaves the room, and throwing tends to result in Dad coming back into the room, Marco's throwing serves an attention function. Behaviors that are tangibly maintained occur in an attempt to gain access to preferred tangible items or activities. These behaviors tend to occur when a preferred item or activity has been removed or restricted. For example, if Allie begins kicking others every time the iPad is taken away, and kicking tends to result in Allie getting more time on the iPad, Allie's kicking serves a tangible function. While the first 3 functions of behavior, escape, attention, and tangible all communicate some message of want or need to others, the final function, the sensory function, does not serve any communicative purpose. We know that a behavior is sensory if the child would engage in the behavior even when he or she is left alone. The behavior itself is reinforcing. It is important to keep in mind that some behaviors look sensory, but may actually be efforts to obtain attention, to escape a situation, or to access some preferred tangible item. We may only deem a behavior as sensory maintained if it persists even in the absence of adult or peer responses to the behavior. As you can already see, IPBS uses information about what typically occurs before and what typically occurs after the behavior in order to conclude function. This chain is called the antecedent behavior consequence chain, or ABCs of behavior. The first piece of information we aim to gather during functional assessment is related to triggers, or antecedents that commonly occur right before the behavior. We must ask and identify when and where this behavior happens most often. What specific triggers tend to prompt the behavior? In addition to direct observation of child behavior, family members can provide valuable insight into common triggers that are likely to result in challenging behavior. This is where parents really do know their children best. Next, of course, we specifically identify the form of the behavior, how often is it occurring, and how long is the behavior occurring. And last, we identify what usually happens immediately after the child engages in the behavior, also known as consequences or outcomes. Usually we are looking at how other people in the child's environment are responding to the behavior. Is attention being delivered? Is a special toy being offered? Does a non-preferred routine end? Now you will practice using the ABCs to better understand child communication through behavior. Please take a moment to turn to item 6 in your activity packets. Read the case example provided and answer the question below. Shauna is sitting in her high chair with nothing on the tray. Her mother is stirring her oatmeal. Shauna begins crying and bangs her head on the back of her seat. Mother says to her, "It's not cool enough, honey, just a minute." Shauna stops crying when the oatmeal is placed on her tray. What is Shauna attempting to communicate through head banging? Is it A, I want your attention, B, I want the oatmeal, or C, I want to escape the situation? You all may take 15 seconds to complete this item. Again, please take a moment to turn to item number 7 in your activity packets. Please read the case example provided and answer the question below. Cameron is riding a trike on the playground bike path. He sees a child move to the sandbox where he had just finished building a roadway. He leaps off his trike and tackles the child. He hits the child. An adult comes over to intervene. She comforts the child. Cameron goes to the sandbox and continues constructing his roadway. What is Cameron attempting to communicate through hitting? Is it A, don't go near my stuff, go away? B, come play with me, or C, I don't want to be here. We'll use 15 seconds to complete this response. Moving on, please turn to item 8 in your activity packet. Again, please read the case example and answer the question below. Evan is playing with Duplo blocks. He tries to attach a block to his stack of 3. He can't quite get the blocks to connect. He looks up at the adult and begins screaming. He holds the stack of blocks up, looks at the blocks, and looks at the adult. The adult helps him put the blocks together. What is Evan attempting to communicate through looking up and screaming? Is it A, I am tired, B, leave me alone, or C, I need your help? Please take 15 seconds to circle your response. The information gained through looking at the EBCs of behavior helps us to make informed decisions about function of behavior and subsequent intervention. It is always important to keep in mind that two kids may engage in what looks like the exact same behavior, but each might be using their behavior for two very different reasons. Hence the need to individualize functional assessment and positive behavior support approaches with each child. The first component to the behavior intervention process is prevention. Teams should encourage caregivers to think about meeting the child where he or she is as much as possible. Prevention strategies should be selected so that the use of the strategy makes the behavior unnecessary or irrelevant to the child. That is, the prevention strategy reduces the likelihood that the child will need or want to use the challenging behavior. Strategies used must fit within the child's natural routines of the family, in the home, and in the community. Prevention strategies that are chosen to use with an individual child must be related to the purpose or function of the challenging behavior and should be involved with changing the triggers to the behavior. Let's take a look at some of these examples of prevention strategies specifically linked to function. When selecting a prevention strategy, the team should ask, how can we alter the routine, environment, or adult behavior so that the trigger is less likely to result in challenging child behavior? For example, if Allie screams almost every time that it's time to leave the playground or to leave some other preferred activity, then perhaps we coach the parent to offer Allie a highly preferred toy to hold during the transition from the playground to the car. The goal will be for Allie to be so distracted by one preferred tangible item that she is no longer finding the transition away from the preferred activity to be as difficult. If Clark tends to kick caregivers during diaper change or other non-preferred activities, then perhaps we coach the parents to sing one of Clark's favorite songs whenever diaper change begins. This is pairing a non-preferred routine with a preferred activity. So again, that the diaper changing process is less challenging for Clark and for the parent. If Marco throws items every time Mom leaves the house, perhaps another family member could play Marco a pre-recorded message of Mom talking just before she walks out the door. This allows Marco some form of access to Mom's attention before her departure occurs. Now it's your turn to practice. Please turn to item 9 in your activity packet. Read the case example and identify the most appropriate preventative positive behavior support strategy. Again, please identify the most appropriate positive behavior support strategy given the information you've learned today. Eli is 2.5 years old. He loves letters and numbers and gravitates towards any toy with text on it. Eli's mother is struggling with his tantrums during mealtime. When it is time for Eli to sit in his high chair, he will cry and bang the tray. Which of the following strategies could be used to prevent Eli's tantrums by making the high chair and the mealtime routine more desirable for both Mom and Eli? A, don't require Eli to sit in the high chair for meal times. B, tape a laminated alphabet strip on his high chair tray. Or C, have Mom provide undivided attention to Eli during meal times. Please take approximately 15 seconds to write your response to this question. Thank you for completing that item. Now that we have discussed prevention strategies, let's move on to discuss the importance of teaching a child new skills and ways of communicating appropriately. During the replacement phase of intervention, we ask, if we can't let this child use challenging behavior to express his needs, how can he express them in ways that are more appropriate? The team must make sure that when the child uses the replacement skill, there is consistent and immediate reinforcement whenever the child uses the skill. The most effective intervention is to give the child a new way of communicating the message that the behavior communicates. Rather than ignoring the message, we provide the child with a functionally equivalent means of communication. When selecting replacement skills, the team should ask, what new skill or mode of communication can we teach the child so that he or she no longer has to use challenging behavior to express wants and needs? The new skill selected and taught must be just as easy for the child to do as the challenging behavior was. The team may need to consider what skills the child already has that might serve as a replacement behavior. Let's take a look at some examples of function-specific skills. For example, if Autumn tends to cry while attempting to get a toy that is out of her reach, and Autumn has yet to develop vocal language, perhaps the caregiver is coached to guide Autumn to sign toy or please before getting her the toy. Over time, the goal will be for Autumn to use her sign or vocalizations to request items instead of crying. If Desiree tends to throw food when she is full and done eating her meal, perhaps the caregiver is coached to guide Desiree to touch a picture exchange card that represents all done before getting her down from the high chair. Over time, the goal will be for Desiree to use hard touch or vocalizations to communicate instead of throwing food. Last, if Noah tends to scream when Dad is on the phone, perhaps family members are coached on how to guide Noah towards other people who are available for attention, like siblings or mom. Over time, the goal will be for Noah to seek out people who are available when Dad is on the phone instead of screaming. Now it's time for you to practice selecting a function-based replacement behavior. Julian is 2 years, 9 months old, and his father is concerned about how Julian throws his toys when he gets frustrated. The throwing happens most often when Julian cannot get his train positioned on the track. Julian's family members usually respond to this behavior by fitting the train into the track for Julian. Within item number 10 of your activity packet, please answer the following question. What new skill, mode of communication can we teach Julian so that he no longer has to use throwing to communicate? A, a sign to request help. B, moving on to another play activity. Or C, finding some other way to play with the train. We will take 15 seconds for you to respond to this item. In order to successfully monitor outcomes, user-friendly forms should be created and used to evaluate progress. Forms could include rating scales, behavioral frequency counts, and check sheets. You should design a monitoring form that can be used by the caregiver easily in your absence. When monitoring outcomes, the team will want to see if the child is learning new skills and see if the challenging behavior is reducing over time. Data are both helpful and vital in that they can indicate progress is being made when crisis might divert the team's attention away from the progress. It can help parents persist when changes do happen to be small and incremental. Data can be used to support plan implementation in new situations or by new people. And data can indicate when a plan needs to be changed or tweaked to better support the child. As you conclude today's webinar, here are some major take-home messages. Early social-emotional wellness develops within the context of relationships. Caregivers help children express emotion, develop emotional regulation, and form secure relationships. Caregivers can support children's social-emotional development by reflecting on their own relationships, understanding the meaning behind challenging behavior, and developing a plan to prevent and respond to challenging behavior. We, as interventionists, best support caregiver competence and child social-emotional development through a family coaching approach. We want to provide a special thanks to Dr. Erin Barton for her work with implementing the pyramid model in homes with families. We thank all of the team at the Center for Leadership and Disability at Georgia State University, and we appreciate the resources and information provided publicly by the Center for Social-Emotional Foundations for Early Learning and the Technical Assistance Center on Social-Emotional Intervention for Young Children. And a special thanks to all of you for participating. Please be sure to complete your webinar post-test once you have completed this webinar. Also, please be sure to submit your completed activity packet, complete with your name and identifying information, on the front of the packet to your EIC.